What is up, everyone? On Friday, the UFC announced that Alexandre Pantoja would be defending his flyweight belt against Steve Erceg at UFC 301. I kind of just wanted to talk about that fight announcement, the overall state of the flyweight division, and then potentially how I think the UFC could improve it moving forward. So it seems like the general consensus from the fans is that they are not excited about this title fight, and I get it, right? You have the champion, Pantoja, defending his belt against the 10th ranked guy in the world. Typically, that means the division is not in a great spot, especially this isn't some sort of like short notice replacement, right? Where like the real challenger is injured and this is like the backup fighter. Like this is their planned fight heading into 301. So I understand why fans don't like it. In my opinion, under the current circumstances of this division, I actually don't hate this fight. I don't hate this matchup, but I will acknowledge that the circumstances with this division right now do kind of suck at this point. The flyweight division's kind of in a weird spot right now because I don't think they have a problem in terms of like the quality of their fights and how fun the matchups are, right? We've had a ton of championship fights in this division. You had the 4 fights with Figgy Moreno. Those were all great. You had the fight of the year contender with Moreno and Pantoja. You had the interim title fight between Moreno and Kai France, which was super fun. And in general, I think a lot of the guys at the top of this division, whether it's Pantoja, Moreno, Royval, Manel Kape, all these dudes, Kai France, a lot of them are very exciting fighters and more often than not are going to put on strong performances. I just think at this point, the division is very thin, and when we look at how much success Pantoja has had, it's just left him with very few actual, like, worthy challengers. So, like, I think I can make an argument that Erceg does, like, deserve the title shot, but in a normal division, he's maybe 2-3 fights away from actually getting a title shot in more stacked divisions. So just kind of to start off with Pantoja's dominance and why this has kind of become an issue and we have to go to the number 10 guy in the division. He currently has 3 wins over Brandon Moreno. One of those was on The Ultimate Fighter, so not technically on the pro record. He has 2 wins over Brandon Royval. He has a win over Alex Perez, Manel Kape, Matt Schnell, and Kai France, which was on Tough, but still has the win there. So then when we're trying to look at potential title challengers for Pantoja, you have Royval, who just beat Brandon Moreno. But I mean, 4 months ago, we saw Pantoja beat Brandon Royval pretty soundly. I do think you could make the argument for doing that one a third time just because Royval would be the highest ranked guy. And I think if Royval could clean up some of the grappling areas where he kind of struggled against Pantoja, it could be a more fun fight. But I think it makes sense why the UFC doesn't want to run the third one after we just saw the second one a few months ago. You have Brandon Moreno, who definitely is out of contention after he lost to Brandon Royval, I think like a month ago. You have Amir Albazi, who's up there in the rankings, but he's coming off a questionable decision win over Kai France, and he was actually supposed to be the guy going up against Brandon Moreno in December, had to pull out, and it sounds like he is still injured, and I don't know how the UFC would feel, giving a dude a title shot coming off of him pulling out for an injury. You have Kai France, who's coming off of back-to-back losses and has not fought in a very long time. And then you have Manel Kape, who probably has one of the better cases to get this shot, but he ended up missing weight in his fight in January, so he didn't even compete. It was against Mateus Nicolau. That is now rebooked for April, but I don't know if you're going to give a dude a title shot who just literally could not fight because he missed weight. It's just not a great look. So I think the 2 most likely choices that the UFC was left with on their current roster would be Muhammad Mokaev and Steve Erceg. Both dudes are undefeated in the UFC. Both are in like that 5 to 10 range in terms of their ranking. I think in terms of their overall UFC resume, I think you got to go with Mokaev as having the more impressive one. He has more fights, more wins. You have the Erceg big win in his last fight, but I mean, prior to that, Mokaev had a submission win over Tim Elliott, which is very impressive. But these dudes fought on the same card very recently, and they had very different results in terms of their fights. We had Steve Erceg, who went out there, knocked out Matt Schnell cold with a beautiful combination left hook, put him out, didn't need any follow-up shots. You contrast that with Muhammad Mokaev, who grinded out like a close decision against Alex Perez, who was coming off a huge layoff. It was not an entertaining fight. He did not look great in the third round. A lot of shooting, not a ton of output, wasn't even really landing the takedowns. So I think when you have that card very recently and Erceg just seemed so much more impressive, I would get it, especially because both these dudes are ranked outside the top 5. Like, if you had to ask me, would I rather watch a Steve Erceg fight or a Mohamed Mokaev fight, I'm choosing the Steve Erceg fight, 10 out of 10 times. I think the only other guy who could have kind of slid into this title shot and saved the day would have been Kyoji Horiguchi, who is not currently in the UFC. He's fought with Rizin, Bellator, but if he returned to the UFC, there were some rumblings of it, some rumors. I'm not sure if it got close, if it was ever really going, but he was 7-1 in the UFC, with his only loss being to Demetrius Johnson. So clearly a top contender, or would be a top contender at 125, but that's clearly not happening with the UFC going with Steve Erceg. So that's how I'm kind of viewing, the title picture, how that whole situation went down. I don't really hate the fight against Erceg. Obviously, it's not great, especially if it's a main event, but with what they have, I understand it. Now let's look at how I think we could fix this flyweight division, because I do think it's salvageable, right? Like I said, you have fun fighters, a lot of fun fights. We just need to get some turnover happening here at the top of the division. Too many rematches, too many potential trilogies, and even if they're fun fights, at some point we got to get some fresh matchups there, especially at the top of that division. So I think Mohamed Mokaev not getting this title shot, he should be lined up for a #1 contender fight, whether that's against Amir Albazi if he gets healthy, whether that's against Brandon Moreno, potentially Brandon Royval, Kai Kara-France if he's healthy, any of those dudes. Mohamed Mokaev should have a fight lined up where if he wins it, he gets the title shot. That would be a fresh challenger for Pantoja if he does end up going through Steve Erceg. If Erceg ends up winning, the division becomes wide open, and all these other dudes seem like they have great opportunities because those are fresh matchups. We've got some other young guys that I think we can kind of propel up the rankings. Tetsuro Taira is at the bottom of the top 15. He is booked against Tim Elliott. Personally, I get the matchup here. It's a nice kind of slower step up in competition, getting into the top 10 territory. I do think if you were a little more urgent in trying to turn over the top, you could give him a more aggressive, matchup, jump him up even higher, but I think that's a fair matchup against Tim Elliott. And then you just got to get some of these younger prospects into the rankings, kind of, push them up the ranks. So guys like Asua Mobayev, Joshua Van, pretty fun fighters who I think, you could get some ranked opportunities moving forward, match them up against some veterans. So I think that would give the division the turnover that it kind of needs. And I guess just in general, if you're bummed about this potentially being the main event, I get it. It's definitely not a great main event. I just think in terms of name power, Pantoja's probably not a guy the UFC really wants to be main eventing. And then you also add in the fact that he's fighting the number 10 dude in the division. It's not a great look. Maybe they add another main event. I think probably what you got to be hoping for, if you're looking for a more stacked card here in Brazil, would be you got to hope that Alex Pereira just runs through Jamal Hill on UFC 300. He's talked about how he wants to turn around and fight at 301. If he's taking any damage, that's not going to happen. So maybe Pereira goes out, just smokes Jamal Hill in the first round, and then Alex Pereira ends up turning around a few weeks later and defending that light heavyweight belt. It could happen, who knows? As a kickboxer, they have very quick turnaround, so we'll see if that's in play. So those are my thoughts on the current state of the flyweight division and the matchup they just announced, Pantoja versus Erceg. How you guys feeling about that fight? How you guys feeling about the division as a whole? Let me know down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.